Europe today is a powder keg, and the leaders are like men smoking in an arsenal. A single spark will set off an explosion that will consume us all. I cannot tell you when that explosion will occur, but I can tell you where. Some damn foolish thing in the Balkans will set it off. This quote is commonly attributed to German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, allegedly from the 1878 Berlin Conference. Now, although this quote is likely apocryphal, it has gained a life of its own because it has expressed a truth we know about the history of the Balkans after that quote allegedly came. But why is this? Well, to understand this, we need to understand the Balkan Wars. The Balkan Wars were a pair of conflicts fought between the Christian Balkan states and the Ottoman Empire in 1912 and 13. But the roots of the war go back much further. The Turks began conquering much of the Balkans in the 15th century, at first simply going around Constantinople and later conquering it in 1452. From this time forward, we have a Muslim minority ruling over a Christian majority. The Muslim Turks would enslave non-Muslim boys living in the Balkans, convert them to Islam, and have them serve in various roles. At first it was as household servants and bureaucrats, but it didn't take too long for them to be assembled into their own army that was under the direct control of the Sultan. Needless to say, this was injury on top of injury for the Balkans, and this was all on top of all the other persecutions Christians had to endure during Ottoman rule. Well, the Ottoman era began to erode in the 19th century, when numerous revolts drove the Turks out of Greece, Serbia, Romania, and Bulgaria. The early 20th century saw the overthrow of Sultan Abdulhamid II, with the Young Turks taking power. However, this revolution triggered more losses of territory, such as Crete being lost to Greece and Bosnia-Herzegovina being annexed by the Austrians. This left Albania, Macedonia, and Thrace under the control of the Ottomans, and the Balkan states all had their eyes on them. The problem, however, was that they all wanted the same territories. Greece, Serbia, and Bulgaria all wanted Macedonia, Serbia and Montenegro both wanted pieces of Albania, all the while Austria-Hungary didn't want either of them to have it. Both Bulgaria and Greece wanted Thrace, but the Russians and British had different plans. The only thing they could agree on was that they wanted the Ottomans gone, and they waited for an opportunity. In 1911, Italy declared war on the Ottoman Empire in an attempt to annex Libya, the last African territory of the Turks. The problem, however, was taking control of Libya was easier said than done because the coastal ports were easy to control, but the interior was a mess of nomadic Bedouin tribes that even the Ottomans were never able to fully gain control of. The Italians easily took control of the coastline, but were never able to penetrate the interior. The Italians tried expanding the war into the Mediterranean and the Aegean, attacking Ottoman ships and ports, but they weren't budging. So King Victor Emmanuel III of Italy spoke with his father-in-law, King Nicholas I of Montenegro, asking him to declare war on the Ottomans so the Turks would have to fight on a second front, and force them to make peace with Italy. Now, Montenegro wasn't insane enough to do this on their own, but with an alliance of Balkan states, they might have a chance. So throughout the summer of 1912, the states of Greece, Bulgaria, Serbia, and Montenegro signed a series of secret treaties agreeing to go to war against the Ottomans. The only problem with these treaties was that they didn't agree on a partition of the desired territories beforehand. This becomes relevant later. On October 8th, Montenegro was the first to declare war on the Ottomans by invading northern Albania. This was followed up a week later by the rest of the Balkan League declaring war. The main prize for most of the Christian states was Macedonia, in particular the city of Salonika, which was the home base of the Committee of Union and Progress, one of the largest factions of the Young Turks who at this time were out of power. This sudden declaration of war forced the Ottomans to negotiate with the Italians, giving them control of Libya. Despite this, things would not go well for the Ottomans. The liberal unionist faction of the Young Turks was in control of the government, and so they decided to enlist a former diplomat with ties to Great Britain, Kamil Pasha, to be the new Grand Vizier, hoping that he could negotiate a better peace with the Great Powers. However, after about a month of fighting, the Great Powers began to change their minds about what they wanted for the Balkans, and began to acclimate themselves to the new reality of the Balkan states having more independent power of their own. They had two things they wanted to ensure: that Albania was not absorbed into Serbia and Montenegro, and that Constantinople was not annexed by Bulgaria, because that would upset the regional balance of power too much. The Serbs were mostly focused on Macedonia, while Greece was focused on the Aegean. Bulgaria, however, was facing the brunt of Ottoman forces in Thrace, who were fighting for dear life to protect the capital, Constantinople. The Turks had lost a lot of ground, losing most of Macedonia and only holding out in a few pockets of Albania. The last strong point they had was the Katalka Line, a mess of cities, fortifications, and trenches between the Aegean and Black Seas. The biggest hotspot along this front was the city of Edirne. This city was very important for the Ottomans because it had numerous mosques where past sultans had been buried, and this is where the bulk of Bulgarian forces had been concentrated. The Ottomans signed an armistice with Bulgaria and Serbia on December 3rd, and a peace conference was held in London. The Balkan League was demanding Edirne be given to Bulgaria despite the fact that the Turks were still in control of the city. This became a sticking point. There had been thousands of casualties on both sides, yet the Allies were demanding the city as compensation. The government of Kamil Pasha was hesitant to give up the city, but feared even more so what might happen if the war were allowed to drag on further, believing the Christians could cross the Bosphorus and invade Anatolia, which had little but the terrain to protect it. On January 22nd, Kamil Pasha and his cabinet met together to agree on terms for accepting the Allied demands. But word of this reached the CUP, who on January 23rd orchestrated a coup by storming the cabinet chamber, killing the war minister, and forcing Kamil Pasha to resign at gunpoint. They took power, and by February 3rd, the fighting had resumed. As the fighting in Macedonia had wrapped up, the Serbians began to send more and more forces into the siege of Edirne. Things kept getting worse for the city, having been cut off from the resupply by sea. On March 26th, the Ottoman commander of the city was forced to surrender to the Bulgarian army, which ended the fighting and initiated 3 days of looting. But such chaos had become commonplace in the war. Non-Muslim soldiers in the Ottoman army had a habit of abandoning their posts at the sight of oncoming Balkan forces. This could possibly be done in response to just a general religious bias favoring the Christian soldiers of the Balkan forces over the Ottomans themselves, but could also be as a result of fearing how the Balkan forces might treat them, considering them, a Christian serving in the Sultan's army, as being traitors to their religion or race. In response to these desertions, the Ottoman armies began punishing local Christian populaces in the areas in which they were retreating. The Serbs would enact their own atrocities against Muslims in Albania for the rumored mistreatment of Christians during an Albanian uprising earlier that year. They burned down villages and decapitated both soldiers and civilians. And as they continued to capture cities, thousands of Muslims clogged up the roads as refugees, using mosques as refugee camps. The Greeks had plans to convert many of these mosques into churches after the war, and place them under the authority of the Patriarch of Athens. Many of these mosques had been churches until the 15th century, when they were converted during the initial Turkish conquests. There was a mosque in Salonika named the Hagia Sophia, not to be confused with a church of the same name in Constantinople that had met the same fate. The city had been jointly occupied by the Serbs, Greeks, and Bulgarians, and on November 13th, the Bulgarians kicked out the Muslim refugees staying in the mosque and erected a cross on the top of the building. Not to be outdone, the Greeks did the same thing with 2 other mosques in the city. The Bulgarians also destroyed mosques with no past Christian affiliation, blowing them up with dynamite. As the siege of Edirne had gotten worse, the Turks committed more atrocities themselves. One incident, confirmed by the Carnegie Commission, described a Turkish soldier tossing a Christian child into the air and skewering them on his bayonet. The horrors of 20th century ethnic cleansing began in the Balkans. The Ottomans eventually surrendered and signed the Treaty of London on May 30th, 1913. But peace was short-lived. On June 1st, Greece and Serbia signed a treaty with the explicit goal of keeping Bulgaria out of the newly won territory in Macedonia. On top of this, Russia had forced Bulgaria to give up some of its territory to Romania, despite Romania having not participated in the war. Bulgaria had gained the least amount of territory and felt abused by the great powers and its allies. On June 13th, Greek and Serbian soldiers began attacking Bulgarian ones in Macedonia. In response, the Bulgarian army began attacking Serbian troops on June 29th. Quickly, all the Balkan states, including Romania, declared war on Bulgaria. They opened up negotiations with the Ottomans on July 10th, but the Ottomans decided to shut them down, and on July 13th, their armies were ordered to reoccupy Turkish territory. They claimed it was just the territory allotted to them in the Treaty of London, but they quickly went beyond those boundaries and retook Edirne. The fighting in the Second Balkan War was quick, ending in about a month. Numerous treaties put an end to the wars, creating the borders that would bring them back into conflict time and time again. If you're interested in learning more about the fall of the Ottoman Empire, I suggest you watch this video I made a couple years ago. And if you enjoyed this video and want to make sure you see more of my videos when they come out, then I suggest you click that subscribe button as well as hitting the bell icon. That'll turn on notifications. You can also click the like button, which tells YouTube that you'd like to see more videos from this channel on your homepage. This video is made with the help of my patrons over at patreon.com/casualhistorian. Over there you can financially support the channel and help me make more videos. You can get perks such as getting to see videos early and getting your name scrolling in the chyron at the bottom of the screen. If you're interested in learning more about the Balkan Wars themselves, then I have my sources listed in the description below. And if you're more of an auditory learner, then I might suggest you listen to the newest episode of my podcast, History of the Modern Middle East, which is all about the Balkan Wars. You can find that episode of the podcast on YouTube, most podcasting services, or you can just go to historyofthemodernmiddleeast.com. And also, if you have time and you haven't done so already, I would like it if you would fill out the Casual Historian 2020 audience survey. Links to that can be found down in the description below as well. Filling that out gives me some more demographic data that the YouTube analytics can't give, as well as helping me direct how to make future videos. Once you're all done here, check out all that stuff. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.